If you let negativity creep in at any moment, it's really going to set you back if you want to get a good time. And it's also going to take away from your fun. So really learn how to keep a positive attitude is probably the most important thing.
Episode 294, we're talking bikepacking with the 2017 Tour Divide winner, Brian Lucido. You're listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast, brought to you by 180 Tech. We talk with adventurers from around the globe to bring you the inspiration and motivation you need to get started in the outdoors or to keep you moving if you're already there. Now here's your host, Kurt Linville.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for listening in again today. Boy, do we have a special treat for you. We have the recent winner of the Tour Divide race, and this is Brian Lucido. Brian took up biking because he couldn't get a horse, and that led to a lifetime of enjoying biking, and he and his wife do a lot of touring, and his biking resume is extensive, so I want to talk about all of that, but the main subject today is about the Tour Divide race. We want to make sure that you guys kind of get the play-by-play on what that was like this year. So, Brian, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you.
Brian, how about, just so people get a little context, you're in California, and you and your wife, Janet, like to do a lot of biking together, and you use a tandem bike, right?
Right, yeah.
Which is awesome. I want to make sure before the show is over, we talk about tandem biking, because that's kind of unique. It gives some advantages and some disadvantages that some of our listeners may not know about, so I want to dive into that a little bit. But before we get into the Tour Divide, will you tell us a little bit about your resume, things that you've done on bikes?
Yeah, sure. I first started bike touring with my friend. His name's Dennis, and we decided to ride down to Mexico. We had this book that kind of guided us along the way, and we started in San Jose, California. And on that first tour, we were on a tandem, actually. It was the tandem I just bought in 1997. And we rode, I think it took us like 10 days. And, we're camping the whole time. And it was pretty good weather, for the winter. We went down in December. And, I loved it. Every single minute of that ride, it was this sense of freedom and, feeling like you could go anywhere you wanted, and it didn't really cost much money. When we were in college, it was kind of we were always trying to save money. So ever after that, I was pretty much hooked, and I spent pretty much all of my free time thinking of ways that I could kind of recreate that tour, or do something else that had that same kind of experience.
So I have to ask, the first ride is the most amazing because,
right.
It's your first experience. Were you ever able to recreate it? I know you've had a big variety of experiences since.
Right. Actually, that's a really good question. The truth is probably not. The first experience is really the most magical one. That was just phenomenal. But, really close. And I think the touring has kind of evolved a little bit, in terms of what I'm trying to get out of it. And so, it's not quite the same in like the way you build it up in your mind. But actually the subsequent trips, I think, were also just as rewarding, but just in different ways. What I mean by that is, I think I've started to learn a lot more about different cultures, and maybe learn a little bit about the histories of different countries by going to different places. So it's not all just about just the freedom of being out on the road, and you can turn anywhere you want. Now it's a little bit more also about learning and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Do you consider yourself more of a bike touring person or a racer?
Oh, definitely a bike touring person.
I knew you'd say that.
Yeah.
Well, the Tour Divide, which I guess it used to be called the Great Divide Mountain Bike Race, right? Now they're calling it the Tour Divide. Did I get that right?
Yeah, they changed it because I think originally it started at the border of the United States and Canada. And if you look at maps, it's called the Continental Divide, maps of the United States. But if you look at a map that includes, or a Canadian map, it's actually called the Great Divide. They refer to that differently. So when they added the Canadian portion, which I believe was like in 2008, maybe I might not be right about that. They changed the name of it.
Well, it's pretty cool. It goes from Banff, Alberta, all the way down to Antelope Wells, New Mexico. So from fairly deep in Canada to the Mexico border.
Right.
And we were kind of talking before here, how long is it really? And it's somewhere around 2,800 miles, so 2,800 miles. But you had some reroutes on this trail or this race. So it's kind of like, well, I don't know how long the reroutes were. I think that from year to year, the route might change a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, what you're going to do is you're going to follow the Adventure Cycling route. I don't know if you know about Adventure Cycling, but they're a company based in Missoula, Montana, and they make up these routes basically. And so that's kind of like the official route is what they've dictated. They're not involved in the race really, but that's the route that you follow. And then, of course, this year we had to change the route because there was a bridge that had washed away due to all the heavy snow, rain up in Canada. The guy who kind of organizes the race, he picked a pretty difficult route, and the purpose of that though was to preserve the scenery. Like they have a really good attitude about it. There was the option of taking a paved road to avoid that bridge, but if you go on the Facebook pages. He was proposing, well, he didn't go on Facebook because he's not a Facebook guy, but he basically was proposing this really difficult route over some really rugged terrain. And you go on Facebook and all these people are like, yeah, and they're excited about it. So I thought that was kind of cool because, people are getting excited about a route that's way more difficult than it has to be. It kind of gives you an idea of the spirit of the people who are involved in this.
Right.
I think if you were involved in like any other type of racing, people would be like moaning, "Oh God, you're making it harder," But no, these people wanted to have more adventure, more scenery. It's a really good group,
Well, this is a self-supported race, and so it's a bike packing race. That means you're carrying everything with you. What are the rules around that? How much help can you have?
Well, none. None really. I mean, obviously, so there's unsupported and then there's self-supported. So unsupported means when you start, you're doing everything for yourself. And that's obviously impossible to do for 2,800 miles. You can't carry that much water. So What you do is you are technically unsupported between towns. And then when you get to a town, you're self-supported. And self-supported means that you go to the grocery store, you buy your food, you fix your own bike. So if you go to a bike shop, I mean, I think technically you're supposed to do your own work on your bike, although I think they're pretty lax about that. If somebody offers you food, it has to be something that's offered to every single racer. So, you're not really allowed to take stuff from kind of random people, but if it's something that's commercially available, then yeah, that's okay for self-supported.
Right. Well, it sounds like an amazing experience, and I was reading an interview that was in a blog online, and there was something on there about you were thinking, well, that would just be a really good way to preview the trail so we could go back and ride it again later.
Yeah.
Quite the preview. So you went almost 3,000 miles in 14 days and 22 hours, 45 minutes. That's a pretty quick preview. Holy cow. And how much of it did you miss in the dark?
Well, that's a good question. There were 2 nights where I rode through the whole night, and one of those nights I think I did actually miss some scenery. But I rode through the last night, all through the night, and I don't think I missed anything. That's through the desert, going through. It depends. Some people like the desert. I personally am kind of like not super into it. But anyway, that section, all I saw were these bunny rabbits, running across the road, probably every 30 seconds. And, you had to basically try to avoid hitting them. I actually hit one.
Oh, no.
It just stopped in my headlight and I went thump, thump. I tried to bunny hop the bunny rabbit, but, I couldn't, I don't think I really succeeded. I didn't look back. I normally feel really horrible about those things, but that particular time I was just like, God, come on, don't be in my way. But, there was a night, up in, Montana. Well, actually it was through Idaho. I rode through the night and I kept thinking, hey, this scenery might be pretty good here. But you can't really tell because your lights aren't bright enough to really illuminate the forest. So, I mean, I probably missed that. Actually, you know what? I saw a guy's pictures. This guy, Ty Dolman, I think his name is. He wrote a really nice blog afterward. And his pictures were actually pretty good through that area. So I think I did miss a little bit of scenery there.
Well, would you take your wife Janet back and do it together?
Well, so I've been asking her, and there's a couple things. You know, the Grand Apart is pretty awesome because you've got, 200 other bike packers who are all, really into bike packing, and it's pretty neat to start with the race. But, you have to do it faster than 30 days in order to be considered a racer. If you go slower than 30 days, which is like 90 miles a day, then you're not considered to be racing. And so I've been kind of checking with her to see like how she felt about that. And she's kind of leaning away from it. She's not like super intrigued by it. She's not a racer. But, you kind of want to do the Grand Apart to like be with the other people. So,
well, maybe start with them and then just let them go.
Right.
Don't sign up and just say, hey, see you guys.
You're exactly right. I mean, that's probably the ultimate thing to do. I mean, she's kind of interested. She's been studying Spanish a lot. And I think right now her big goals are to go to somewhere in Latin America. I think we have plans. We don't have official plans, but we're going to start making them to go to Guatemala and, continue her Spanish down there. So I think that there's kind of other objectives that are a little bit higher on the priority list right now. But, it is really pretty, that Great Divide. And it's, really nice terrain because you can be out there for a really long time, without seeing cars, without kind of the whole civilization thing. Like if you like backpacking, you can kind of get that sense because you're out away from everything for a really long period of time. So it's a pretty good route.
Well, here's a question for you. Would you take a tandem bike on this route? It sounds to me like that would be really tough, but you would.
No, I totally would. It's actually a really good route for a tandem. So a lot of the grades, I mean, not all of them, but a lot of them aren't very steep, which, I mean, that's kind of the killer on a tandem is when it gets really steep. There are a couple sections that you have to walk. There's this kind of section called the wall, which is really short. I mean, in comparison to the whole thing, it's really short. It's a steep single track that is really hard to walk up. But, it's so short. It's just over. And then, the rest of it's pretty rideable. But it would be a superb tandem course, especially if you took out that reroute. We got that reroute at the beginning. Right. That was really hard. If you took that out, it would be really a fantastic tandem course. And I would love to do it with her, but I want to make sure that she's really into it also.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So describe for us the nature of the trail. I mean, we're talking about nearly 3,000 miles of trail, but on average, what's the trail like?
I mean, it seems like the majority of the time you're riding on fire roads, and a lot of them are washboards, so it's not, it's not super smooth sailing. I'm shocked by the fact that a lot of people do it on fully rigid bike.
Yeah.
I had front suspension, and I would have liked to have had full suspension. So we have a full suspension tandem, and that I think is going to start to become more of our touring bike. The reason is because we always find ourselves on dirt roads.
Right.
Whenever we're touring, we're just like, hey, what goes down? What's down there? And always invariably it's a dirt road, but the dirt roads just always look more exciting. So we get beat up on our rigid tandem.
Sure. Yeah, no doubt. Well, hey, let's get back into kind of the details of your particular race. I would like to do a play-by-play and see so people get a feel for what it was really like. Take us there. Then we'll dive back into some of your other exploits on bikes. I mean, let's see, you've crossed the United States from west to east, now north to south as well. And you've been to Colombia, to Peru. You've been around Europe, Scandinavia, the Baltics, down to Panama, and you rode through the Andes. And so you've done so much touring. I want at the end of the show to cover some of that. But will you just come back to the the Tour Divide, and let's talk about what the first day was like, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Yeah, it might be kind of difficult, but I'll try. Yeah, the first day we got together, and we're all gathered out there, and there's this guy named Crazy Larry. You could probably look this guy up on the internet, but this is kind of an underground race. I don't know if you knew that, but that's probably part of the reason why the website hasn't been updated, is they are trying to kind of keep it underground.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it? It's more of a thing that you show up and you do the ride, and it's not really an official sponsored thing.
That's right. And in fact, when you're there, everyone calls it a race. There's the GDMBR, and that R, a lot of people say, is the Great Divide Mountain Bike Race. But Crazy Larry reminds you it's not the race, it's the route. So,
there you go.
Just a bunch of friends riding together is kind of how it works. But, some of us are trying to go faster than others.
Right.
So he's kind of, I don't know, this like pep talk guy. And I mean, there isn't really an organizer, but him being there really made it feel organized. So we're all gathered out there. It rained all night the night before, and we're all probably pretty nervous. And, we get out there and the trails are kind of muddy from the night before, and then it starts raining. But, it was fun at the beginning because, it was a comfortable pace. In other words, when you take off, in a lot of these races, guys will just like shoot off and, hammer their brains out. But in this race, because it is so long, it was comfortable enough pace that I could even talk to people. And so I got to know maybe like a dozen people at the beginning of the race, which is kind of nice, to know who else is going to be there. And I didn't really get to see them as much, after like the fifth day. I think I didn't see anybody for the rest of the race. So, or maybe fourth day, I can't remember. Anyway, so that day it started raining, and then, we ended up going through some mud that, is like maybe 6 miles, I think. Maybe it was only 3. I don't know. It felt like, 100 miles. This mud that you push your bike a foot, and then you clean off all the mud, that's accumulated on your tires. It's like, maybe 20 pounds of mud. And then you push your bike another foot, and then you clean off all the mud. It just takes forever. And then, after you deal with that kind of barrier, the mud gets a little bit better. And then, next thing you know, you're on that reroute, which is like a 30+% grade that you're walking up. And it's just rocks, baby heads piled up. And water's flowing down it like a waterfall. Your feet are soaked. You're at the top, you're walking through snow and giant puddles. So it's pretty difficult. But, the whole time I wasn't really, I didn't let it get me down at all. I think that the other people I saw, they were like getting really frustrated with having to walk so much. And I feel like that for me, that was actually a big advantage of, all of the touring that we had done in South America, where, we pushed through mud for, eons down there.
Right. So
having that experience, I was kind of like, well, this is kind of bad, but, it's not that bad.
Well, and you're all in it together. It's not like one racer has a good route,
Actually, that's a really good point. One thing I was thinking in my head was, boy, this is going to suck for those guys. Rather than like thinking about it in how it like was affecting me, I was more kind of using it as like a psychological, like, boy, those guys are going to have a tough time through here.
That's funny. Well, keeping a good attitude has got to be paramount for a race like this.
That's right. You're
going really hard day after day after day on very little sleep. How much sleep do you think you got on average?
Actual sleep, probably maybe 5 hours a night, maybe. Yeah. I mean, I haven't actually calculated it. You could probably, we have all this tracking information. I could probably figure it out. One thing I was doing, though, is because it wasn't quite enough sleep, I was getting drowsy on the bike. And that's dangerous. So what I would do is whenever I felt drowsy, I would just like run off to the side or ride off to the side of the road and just lie down and set a timer. And I found out that I would lie there for 5 minutes every single time. It was always 5 minutes. And I'd wake up after 5 minutes. I mean, it wasn't really like a sleep, but it was kind of like, you stop thinking about normal things and you kind of have like dream thoughts.
Yeah.
And after 5 minutes, I was good to go for 1, maybe 2 hours.
Wow. So it was just the reset button you needed to press.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you did this for 14 days, and there's some other long bike races, maybe not this long, where people, because you can do it in maybe 5 or 6 days, people are really tempted to only sleep maybe an hour a night. You know what I mean? But with 14 days, do you think anybody could hold up with that kind of punishment?
Well, actually, so remember, before the interview, we were talking about records and stuff.
Right.
So there's this guy named Mike Hall who, I don't know if you know this, but he tragically died this March in the Indian Pacific Wheel Race, which is kind of like this, except Australia. He was hit by a car.
Oh.
And I don't know the circumstances of it, but you can always think, because the death rate in these types of events is actually pretty high. Like Race Across America, how guys die. Just this year, a guy named Eric was hit by a car in Trans Am. That's the 4,000-mile one.
Right.
I don't know the circumstances, but the way I felt when I was sleepy, you could easily see if there were cars out there that I could have maybe done something stupid and gotten hit by a car. So anyway, that guy Mike Hall, I studied his. Before the race, I actually studied his GPS tracks pretty carefully. It looked like he was sleeping about 3 hours a night. And so he actually rode, like if you look at his speed, his moving speed, he rode a fair amount slower than I did, but he slept a lot less. And so that's how he was able to go so fast, or set such a great time, is he could sleep 3 hours a night. And I bet you there's people, like if you took a Race Across America, those guys sleep even less. So there's people that can go on very little sleep.
Yeah, and that's part of this stuff that I think would be particularly difficult. You and I were talking about the Colorado Trail race, and I was sharing that I'd love to do the Colorado Trail, but I don't want to do the race because I do want to sleep. I want to enjoy myself,
Right.
So I guess that would kind of be for me, that would be the big decision point about whether or not to do a race versus just to do a ride.
Right.
And so,
well, the races, they seem kind of glamorous, but I think you're going to probably have more fun not doing it as a race, but doing it, as either a tour or something in between. You can still race it and have a great time. The 30-day. It's basically you're not considered a racer if you're taking longer than 30 days. But if you did 30 days on the Great Divide mountain bike race or route or whatever, you'd be doing 90 miles a day. And 90 miles a day, you can get plenty of sleep. You can sleep 8 hours a night. You can talk to people, which is a fun aspect of the race. You can take pictures. So, somewhere in between.
Right.
Like what I did, which is, I don't know, it's something that I wanted, to go fast, but I'm not advocating that as like a fun thing to do. It was fun, but it's not the most fun way to experience it probably.
Well, 14 days gives you time to know better, right? Did you come to a point where you were like, why am I doing this?
No, never. I like it, I don't like wasting time. So it's fun to, it feels good to go fast. And also actually one thing about going faster is it kind of allowed me to stay more comfortable because I could go from like a huge distance to get from one hotel to another. So I stayed in hotels, more than a lot of people because I could make that leap from one town to another.
Right.
So that allowed me to get better sleep, too.
By now, you certainly know who Bent Gate is. That's for a great reason. Bent Gate Mountaineering has been sponsoring the Adventure Sports Podcast almost from the beginning, and we really appreciate that. They've made it possible for all the great shows to continue coming your way. We want to say thanks by reminding you to go to them for your backcountry gear. If you live in Colorado, then just stop by their store in Golden. If not, go to bentgate.com. They have what you need, from the latest ultralight gear to the tried and true classics for climbing, hiking, and camping, like Arc'teryx, Hilleberg, Nemo, Western Mountaineering, and many more. Need advice? They have you covered there too. Their staff are passionate adventurers who can offer help from their own experiences. Bentgate also hosts lots of events and speakers. Check out their website to see the schedule and to see all of their products. Help take care of the Adventure Sports podcast by getting your gear from Bentgate Mountaineering. Just did the quick math here, and you were going on average about 190 miles a day, just under that.
Yeah, exactly. 185, I think.
And that's a long ride. Now, here's the thing. Going 180 miles on a road bike on pavement is not easy, but people do it. Mm-hmm. But you're not doing that. You're on a mountain bike, and you're on dirt roads and trails. So what does it feel like to cover that much distance, not just once, but day after day after day after day?
Yeah, well, it takes a lot of time, So like on a road bike, you could go 200 miles in 11, 12 hours.
Right.
I mean, some people even do it in 10. You have like a group and a pace line. But for me, I'm riding like, I don't know, like 17, 18, some days 20 or 24 hours, a day. So it basically just takes more time. But, I'm never really pushing hard, rarely out of breath. So it doesn't it's not like a super taxing thing on your body in terms of cardiovascular effort. It's more of just kind of like a continuous movement type of thing. So by going kind of slowly, it makes it more feasible,
Sure. I'm still overwhelmed with how difficult it would be. You're making it sound like it's not that big of a deal, but I know better. This is this is a big deal.
You go slow and you don't stop.
Right. I think it's the not stopping that would kill me. I mean, your hands, your back, right, your butt. Yeah. I mean, it's got to just be excruciating after a while.
Well, your hands, there's not a whole lot you can do about. A lot of people who I've been communicating with have told me that they have nerve damage in their hands, and I have some in my right hand. So that's kind of inevitable. Your butt, you can actually take really good care of. I had this washing protocol. So I'd triple wash my butt every time I went to the bathroom. So I'd wash it with water, use hand sanitizer, and then put this antifungal on there. So there's stuff you can do. The race becomes largely about taking care of your body.
Interesting.
Really comes down to that. I spent a lot of time taking care of my body.
You'd have to.
And of course, taking care of the bike too.
Well, what about food? I mean, you're burning a lot of calories for a very long period of time every day. Did you lose a lot of weight on this race?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe up to 10 pounds. I unfortunately didn't have a scale.
Made you pretty easy going about all this. What was your food? How did you stay energized?
Well, it's a little bit complicated. So I have type 1 diabetes. And so at home, I'll eat a really low carbohydrate diet. And so at home, I eat a lot of non-starchy vegetables, green stuff.
Right.
And stuff that's pretty high in fat, like meat and protein. And I'll eat 100 grams, 50 to 100 grams of carbohydrate in a day. So to give you an idea of what that is, 50 grams is like 2 slices of bread.
Right.
In a whole entire day. So it's really low carbohydrate. Very few people eat that low carbohydrate. But when you're racing, everything changes. So first of all, I have to inject way less insulin because my insulin sensitivity goes way up when I exercise. And I have to eat a lot more carbohydrate to deal with that insulin. It's kind of hard to explain, but what came first, the chicken or the egg? But if you're putting in like 10 units of insulin, you're going to have to eat a certain amount of carbohydrate to kind of deal with that insulin. So
right.
Because most of the food stops are in small towns or like gas stations, I mean, gas stations probably the number one place that you're going to fuel up. You kind of have to get like a list of foods that are compatible. And what I was eating was, those protein bars, like Met RX, I think they're called, and all the different derivatives of those. I would always go for protein because it's really easy to get carbohydrates, right? If you go to a gas station, like 95% of the calories at a gas station are carbohydrate.
Right.
But, protein's kind of in low supply. So I would get the highest protein bars I could get. I'd eat muscle milk, that kind of stuff. Anything that was like high in protein. So I'd eat beef burritos. And then, of course, along the way, you could there were a few establishments that made food. And I would call ahead and I would say, hey, any way you can get me a steak. And so, again, trying to really get high protein and high fat and, not so much carbohydrate. But, of course, you need the carbohydrate, just,
keeping it in balance. So,
yeah,
with type 1 diabetes, I'm glad you brought that up because I did want to cover that. There are a lot of people that probably would see that as a huge additional challenge to what you're trying to do here. And I love it that you're saying, no, you can do it. You have to just know how to do it. What special approaches did you have to take so that you could do this kind of exercise? And it's a different routine, is what you're saying, than what you would have,
right.
Every day at home.
Right. Well, first of all, I had to do some testing. So, I mean, you're not going to just like show up at one of these races and figure it out when you're out there. So what I did is I did some long rides. Diabetes is incredibly complex. Type 1 is incredibly complex. You're taking your life in your own hands with these injections. I mean, to give you an idea, the smallest amount that I can inject is 1 unit, and that's like a quarter the size of a raindrop, basically, of insulin. And if I'm like sitting on the couch, that 1 unit will dispose of about 10 grams of carbohydrate. So that's like, a quarter of a slice of bread. So that 1 unit will allow me to eat that once a quarter slice of bread. But when you're exercising like this, that same amount of insulin needs, 10, maybe even 15 times that amount of carbohydrate. So if I put that insulin in, I can't take it out, right?
Right.
And I need to have food in my hands in order to, deal with that insulin, basically. So you don't want to be injecting insulin and then be like, oh, I ran out of food, because you'll literally die. 1 unit, that quarter raindrop could lower my blood glucose by about 500 milligrams per deciliter. And normal blood glucose is 83. So you die if you hit 0. So if you take 83 and you subtract 500, that's like negative.
Ouch.
Yeah, right. So so you have to be really careful because, normally when you're sitting on the couch, that 1 unit would hardly even affect you. But when you're exercising, it's enough to really knock you out. So anyway, because you're alone, you really have to kind of err also on the side of caution, which means that you're not trying to get normal blood sugars, but instead you try to run a little bit high, which is bad for your long-term health, but it allows you to do these kinds of things, right?
Sure.
So not a lot high, just a little high.
Well, and at one point in your race, you had a hypoglycemic attack.
Right.
Was that because you had a little bit too much insulin or just not enough carbs coming in? What caused that?
A good question. I actually don't know. I hadn't really been changing. So I'd been kind of on a regimen, and maybe too little carbs coming in. Maybe I might have screwed that up, but I hadn't really changed my insulin injection. So I don't really know. Like I said, also, type 1 is incredibly complex. So your sensitivity to insulin can change based on your elevation. And it's not like, either remember I told you it could drop you 500 or it could drop you 10. It's not always 500 or 10. It could be anywhere in between.
Right.
And so really, you're constantly guessing. And so, the best thing for a type 1 diabetic to do is to do the same thing every day in terms of their food and their exercise. And that's what I try to do at home. But obviously, when you're in this race, it's hard to do the same thing every day. You can't eat the same thing every day because you can't, you're going to a different store all the time.
Right.
And you can't really exercise the same every day because, one day you're doing 100 miles or 150 miles, the next day you're doing 230. So it's pretty variable. So you really have to kind of be on it, and you're making an educated guess about how much to inject every single time. It's just an educated guess.
That sounds actually very scary to me.
It's a little scary, but you have to remember that, you always carry emergency food. So you're carrying a carbohydrate rich source that I'm going too low, boom, eat that food, and then you'll be okay.
Well, I think it's cool that you've found a way to do this, and I think it's a neat example to let other people know that it is possible.
Right.
How long did it take you to sort out how to manage the diabetes when you're doing this kind of exercise?
I'm still figuring it out. I read a lot about diabetes all the time. I can get anything I can get my hands on. And I have kind of an understanding of how it works. I think maybe a little bit more than what they tell you, like the doctor tells you.
Right.
So I think that's important because when you are making that educated guess, I think that, to have a little bit of science behind it, I think that really helps. And so I think, if anybody who is listening does have type 1 diabetes, and they really want to try to do something, and increase their health, there's a lot of excellent information on the internet. There's also a lot of terrible information on the internet. I'm lucky, I studied biology. I only have an undergraduate, but it really helps me kind of differentiate, what I'm reading is factual and what to be skeptical of,
Well, I like your example that you're still finding a way to get out and do all this stuff. And, you've done a lot of long rides, not just the Great Divide, Tour Divide race. And so I guess you probably were able to hone your techniques and your habits on all of these rides. But
yeah,
I just keep thinking, I love the idea that someone that's challenged with diabetes can do this stuff, but how do you safely learn how to manage it? Do you have any advice for people? Building knowledge, you've said that, study it, understand it, but is there anything else that they really need to know?
Well, diabetes behaves differently in different people. So, tell you the truth, I think it really does come down to studying and experimenting. I think the best thing you can do, though, when you're experimenting is to take small steps. In other words, if you're going to change your insulin dose, do it in really small, baby steps. You don't want to be making big changes fast unless there's a really good reason to, because you really can do something dangerous if you make a radical change.
Right.
I tried, just switching the time of day that I injected my basal insulin. You have different kinds of insulin, and one of them's basal that lasts 24 hours. And making that changeover was really painful on my body. I had lots and lots of hypoglycemia during that transition. I did it too fast. So, but if people do have type 1 diabetes, sometimes I think. I was really depressed when I found out for a week. But if you really think about it, you're kind of fortunate of all the diseases you can have, because in this year, 2017, it's pretty much entirely treatable, so you can, if you're willing to put in the work, and it's a lot of work, because every time you eat, you have to do something. But if you're willing to put in the work, you can basically not have any problems.
Well, I have to share with you that both of my grandparents on my father's side died of diabetes. And I've seen firsthand what can happen when it's not treated properly. I love what you're doing, saying, yeah, you can manage this. This is something we can do.
Yeah. Well, it's entirely, I mean, both type 1 and type 2, especially type 2, are, through changing your diet and, obviously for type 1, you have to really figure out your insulin dosing.
Right.
And then, of course, exercise, the jury's kind of out as to whether or not exercise is good for type 1, but it's absolutely crucial for type 2. I think everyone agrees on that. I think it's good for type 1 personally. I think it really helps me. The more I exercise, the less insulin I have to inject. And there's a lot of science out there right now that says that the less circulating insulin you have in your body, the lower your risk for pretty much cancer and all sorts of diseases. Having a lot of insulin circulating in your body is not a good thing. A lot of research papers have come out pretty much saying that. So exercise reduces your insulin requirements pretty much across the board.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating stuff.
If you're enjoying the Adventure Sports Podcast with episodes twice a week and want to help support the show and keep it going, go check out our ASP member deals site. For as little as $4.95 a month, you can enjoy some adventure discounts while supporting our cause. Go to members.adventuresportspodcast.com and sign up for a monthly plan at $4.95 a month, or save a little with the annual plan and get your free 180 stove. Thanks for listening, guys.
Let's jump back into the race. Just a few highlights. Can you tell us a story about one of your favorite experiences on the race?
Well, my favorite experience was when I finished, my sister was there with her family. And, you're kind of emotional at that point because you have a lot going on in your head. And I actually had I had a thought run through my head that she might be there right near the end, which is really strange. It wasn't until the end. And I said, I wonder if they're going to be there. And I don't know where that came from. Almost like an aura or something. I don't really believe in that. But, the fact that it popped into my head, and I started thinking, maybe like an hour to go, I started thinking, what if they're going to be there? And then, I said, no, they're not going to be there. You're getting all excited about this for nothing. And I actually started crying a little bit at that point, with an hour to go. And then I got there and they were there, and it was pretty cool. I can't tell you how happy I was to see them. It was a great surprise. But in terms of the race, I mean, the whole thing was just awesome. It was just fun to be out there. I mean, it's always fun to be out in nature, and it's hard for me to think of like even a single moment that was better than another. It's just, even I was having fun even in the rain, which is a little bit unusual for me because I used to really hate the rain, but I don't know, I was really having a good time even then.
So do you have any special memories about people that you met along the way on the Great Divide race?
Yeah, actually the people were probably one of the most fun things. I should have said earlier, but they were, meeting these people. I really wanted to stop and spend more time with them. There was Kathy and Stan at Pie Town. They had this place called Pioneer, which is like super popular because I guess they were on the news. And she told me that they were called by a newscaster, and they said, "Hey, is it gonna be okay if you guys do an interview with us?" And she said, "Yeah, sure." And they said, "You do know that you're going to get a whole lot more business." And she said, "That's fine." And so now they're like overwhelmed with like pie requests.
That's great.
Yeah. But anyway, Kathy and Stan, they were super awesome. I wanted to spend the whole afternoon talking to them, and because I was racing, I had to say, "Hey, I gotta get going," So probably spent like, I don't know, 20 minutes talking to them, and they were super nice, but there's a whole ton of places. There's Kirsten at the Brush Mountain Lodge in Colorado, and she is like a super big Tour Divide enthusiast. And they're all watching the dots. Basically, you have a tracker on you so they can see you coming, and they know when you're coming. And so she's there, and she's like super excited and just saying all these encouraging things, and you just want to spend all this time talking to them. But, because it's a race, you end up like spending way less time than you should have, which is actually a reason to tour it instead of racing.
Right.
Because you get in these places and you have these great conversations with people, and you want them to keep going. You don't want to just like run out of there. So I'm actually a pretty big advocate of touring it instead of racing it, because you do miss a lot,
Yeah, that's really cool. We've heard from a lot of people that whatever the sport is, it's often more about the people that you meet along the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, neat.
Yeah.
Do you have a story about a particularly low point, something that was hard?
Well, I think I told you about the hypo, but that was a low point. One night I rode all through the night. It was like on night 5 or 6 or something like that. And riding through the night's a bad idea unless it's like the last night. I think you really need your sleep. So what happened is, I rode through the night and it was actually really high. I was feeling so great. I'm like, yeah, I'm riding through the night. I'm getting ahead. And that was great. And it's really fun riding at night. But then, kind of the next morning, and I started to feel a little bit tired. And then, you keep going and it's like afternoon, and I really lost a lot of motivation because I was so tired. And that's when I started doing the cat naps, actually. And so those helped a little bit, but I found myself lingering. I actually met a guy who was doing the Trans Am race. What happens is, our route intersects with their route, because they're going east to west and we're going north to south, and they run about the same time. So I met a guy there and we were chit-chatting, and I don't know, I was just kind of like losing time. I wasn't really motivated to like move and talking to that guy, and just kind of stopping in a lot of places. So anyway, that was kind of a low, that the second half of that day. So I would advocate to anybody is get your sleep.
It's interesting you would say that. We interviewed Yari Kirkland Hyatt about an adventure race that her team won. And when they started the race, they all got a stomach flu, and they got really sick. And they ended up having to get more sleep for 2 or 3 nights than they ever anticipated. And so they were way behind. The other teams, were going on a minimum amount of sleep, like 90 minutes a night. But in the end, they won the adventure race. And I said, I'm not so sure that the sleep deprivation works. You guys might be the proof. You could go harder and stronger during the day because you had to rest more at night.
Right.
And I don't know what that strategy might be, right? I just know that a lot of these endurance racers really push the sleep window. Right. And it sounds like for you, you found out that not enough sleep really did you in.
Yeah. 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 And it's just not fun. I mean, regardless of whether or not you're going faster, it's just not as fun.
Sure.
So I think that you really got to get to sleep, because then you have a good time, and when you're having a good time, I think you go faster. So it works on both ends.
Right. Well, you already told us the story about coming to the end, and it just sounds amazing. But we can tell that you're exhausted at this point. You're tired, and you mentioned having this sense that your sister, right, would be there. And I've heard so many people talk about endurance racing, that it takes you to a place mentally that is not where you normally are, right? And some people describe it as a really good place. Some people describe it as kind of wild with, hallucinations and everything else. Did you have any experiences like that?
No hallucinations.
You got enough sleep then. Good for you.
Well, I mean, for me, the objective was to not like suffer. And so I really didn't want to push the whole sleep thing. Right. I really didn't. And that one all-nighter, I shouldn't even call it an all-nighter, because I did take a nap for maybe 45 minutes in a bathroom. I don't actually know how long it was, but anyway, so I did get even a little bit of sleep that night too. So no hallucinations.
Well, that's good. Well, man, it sounds like it was an amazing race for you. And you've got such a humble demeanor about it, but what you accomplished is no small feat. So congratulations. I think it's awesome. Yeah. And what do you think the key was to your success? If you were going to tell someone else who wants to do it and be competitive, what would your advice be?
Well, I mean, it's not just any one thing, right? So since I might do more of these, I don't want to
don't give away all your secrets.
But I mean, obviously keeping a positive attitude is super huge. I mean,
Right.
I don't really know what was going on with some of the other competitors, but if you let negativity creep in at any moment, it's really going to set you back if you want to get a good time, and it's also going to take away from your fun. So really learn how to keep a positive attitude is probably the most important thing. And then, of course, you got to train for it. You can't just show up without training, but I think everyone knows that. And then, of course, just having experience with bikepacking is useful. I think that can save you some time, just practicing your bikepacking and, going on little adventures and going places where it's not always easy.
Sure. Well, let's briefly talk about your kit. I think the big debate is whether or not to bring a sleeping bag, whether or not to bring some sort of a tent, because everyone's trying to be as light as possible. What did you do?
Well, I think everyone brings a sleeping bag, although there was one kid who I talked to right at the beginning and he had no sleeping bags. I don't know what he did. I would have loved to talk to this guy more, but we were in the middle of the race. So all he said was, "It always works out."
He has a trick he doesn't want to tell.
Right. But what do you do? I was trying to hotel hop, but I mean, I still camped 4 nights and, didn't camp, rode through the night 2 nights. So that's 6 nights where there was no hotel. So I don't know what this guy did. But yeah, I carried everything. So I had a full tent, a 2-layer tent. So it was protected from the rain. I didn't use it much. I tried to camp I camped at a post office one night when it was threatening to rain, and I camped under the awning of a school another night. And for me, that was by design. I mean, that's not rugged wilderness type camping, which I prefer. But because this was a race, I knew that I could save time by not having to set up the tent.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know. It when you're racing, it's very different from what you do when you're touring. So when you're touring, you're trying to be out in the wilderness or somewhere where there's a really good view, it's pretty, and a nice place where you can cook your dinner and have a nice kind of a relaxing evening. But when you're racing, you're really thinking of practicality. So the post office was cool because they left the door unlocked and they had a kind of an awning. And so I just set up on the awning, and then I figured, well, if it really starts to rain, because there's lightning everywhere. So if it really starts to rain, I'll go inside the post office. And the same thing with the church. They had an awning, so that was nice to be under. No tent. Yeah. But I was carrying a tent.
So how heavy do you think your kit was?
Well, the bicycle plus all the gear, minus water and minus food, was 35 pounds. And that's pretty much as light as anybody else out there.
Yeah, that's light.
Yeah.
Your bike, let's see, you were on an S-Works stump jumper.
That's right.
Hardtail.
So 19 pounds. Yeah.
Wow, that's a light one. 19 pounds.
It is, yeah. And, it's kind of pushing the limit. Before the race, I was really worried about my spokes because it has a really low spoke count. The front wheel, I think, is 18 or something. That's really low. And I didn't think that was a good idea. But it was what I had, and I didn't want to go spending all this money on another set of wheels that was a little bit more robust. And in retrospect, I'm really happy because, everything held up fine. I did have spare spokes just in case. But yeah, 19 pounds is pretty light, and for, just for the base. And then, I really didn't carry anything extra, and I take that back. I did carry things that I didn't need. I found out that I didn't need gloves. Gloves are a time waste. So when you're taking off your jacket, they get caught in the jacket.
Sure.
When you're in the store, if you're trying to use your phone, you need to take off your gloves. I'm constantly taking off my gloves. And I found that, they don't keep your hands warm. I kind of knew that because as soon as they get wet, they're probably worse. I had made these things called plastic bag pogies.
Right.
You know what pogies are?
Sure. They go over the handlebars and kind of protect your hands.
So I got that idea from this guy, Eddie O'Day, who actually was in the race this year. He's won a bunch of stuff. He's super fast. And somebody had asked him in an interview that was published online, they said, "What's the one piece of gear that you couldn't live without?" And he said, "My plastic bag pogies." So I made these things, they would cost like nothing.
Right.
And they were amazing. And so I could have substituted or gotten rid of the gloves and then just use these pogies. I ended up losing them, unfortunately, but I lost them after it stopped being cold.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, actually, how much something like that can work, even though it's open.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
keeping your hand dry and blocking the wind. I mean, that's everything.
That's right. Yeah, it was amazing. So there are a few things, I never used my arm warmers. A few things that I didn't use. But yeah, that kit, I could probably get it down to 34 and still be safe.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Maybe even 33.
Well, let's spend a little bit of time because we're running out of time. I want to hear about touring on a tandem. First of all, what would you say is the biggest advantage to being on a tandem bike?
Well, if you're touring, it's probably social. So people are really drawn to the tandem. It's kind of like a conversation piece. I mean, if you're just touring, people might come up and talk to you because you got your panniers. But if you're touring on a tandem, people are gonna really want to come talk to you, and it's been a really great icebreaker. In lots of countries that we've traveled to. We oftentimes give kids rides, where I'll drive the tandem and a kid will jump on the back and they'll, they love it. They get to pedal and see what it's like. So I think that that's a really big advantage. The other huge advantage is that we're never separated. And, for some couples that might not be a good thing. But for us, it's great. I mean, we love being together and she's very patient because I talk a lot about like things that she's probably not interested in, but
I've always wondered how much efficiency is gained because, I mean, the one tandem weighs a little less than two separate bikes. You have less wind drag because the person in the front is breaking the wind for the person behind, and you have two people pedaling. So it's kind of like a little bit more than one person's wind drag, but with twice the pedal power. So is that a marked improvement?
We have actually three tandems. We have a road racing tandem, and on that tandem, absolutely. So, I mean, we can go faster on that tandem when it's flat or downhill than we can on our individual bikes. So yeah, it kicks butt. But when it comes to touring, once we fully load that thing, it's 105 pounds. And if there is a difference, I don't notice it.
Okay.
I don't feel like there's an advantage in any way. But for Janet, she's a slower rider than I am, so still we're together. So I can't say that on touring we go faster than we would on our individual bikes, totally, because it's harder to handle, especially on dirt.
Right.
But we're together.
Sure, which is fun. Now, this is really a novice question, but hopefully someone else out there is asking the same question. When you're pedaling, can you input your energy independent from each other, or do you have to have the same pace?
On these bikes, you have to have the same pace. They do make a bike. I think it's called Da Vinci. Da Vinci makes a bike where the riders can pedal independently, at your own cadence. But on almost all tandems, you have to have the same cadence. You can, of course, input different amounts of power, but the revolutions per minute is going to be the same.
And that's kind of why I asked, because if you have a strong rider and a weak rider, and I'm not calling either of you strong or weak, but if you had a really weak rider, they could be dragging against your efficiency, not helping, right?
Right. Yeah. You don't want to talk about that. Do you want your tandem relationship to continue?
Well, and that's why I kind of brought that up, right? I mean, you have to come to terms with it somehow, right?
Right. Well, I mean, I made this mistake in the past. You never ask, "Are you pedaling?" you never say that. I mean, even if you feel that way, that's a quick way to end your tandem relationship. So yeah, don't ever ask that, even if you think it.
Well, what's cool about it is that it really means you guys are a team.
Yeah.
And I think that when two people come together and they're pedaling together and, you have the same cadence,
yeah,
then it joins you even more than just being on one bike and being close enough to visit and not getting separated. I mean, you're kind of like one organism at that point.
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
Well, that's fun. So you would recommend tandems then for touring?
Well, I think they're a blast. But, some people, we have friends and they talk about the tandem a lot. And a lot of couples say, I could never ride a tandem with, my partner. And usually we say, why? And they'll say, well, because, so-and-so is a control freak or, that kind of thing. So I don't think it's going to work for every couple. But, Janet's definitely not a control freak. And she's willing to trust me as the driver, which, by the way, usually the taller, heavier person goes in the front, so they're the driver.
Okay.
So, I mean, if she were taller than me and heavier, then she would be the driver. But, usually the guy's in the front because usually they're heavier. And that just makes the handling way better. So, yeah, I mean, some people say they can do it and, they do great, and then other couples, they don't even try because they know that they won't do it.
Wow. Well, man, we've covered a lot of information on the show today. Kind of did a little bit about just general bike touring, talked about the whole tandem thing. I loved your insights and recommendations for doing this kind of stuff with type 1 diabetes. I think that that's so valuable. And I also enjoyed just hearing about the race. So congratulations again for winning the Tour Divide Race 2017. Very, very cool.
Thank you.
Well, thanks also for your time for being on the show today.
Yeah, it was cool. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, and for all the listeners out here, I always say get out there and have some fun, and I do mean it. And it's so cool to hear about the variety of ways that you can do things. To do a race like this as a preview of a trail you might want to go back to, or to ride a tandem bike so you're in sync with someone the whole time, or not, so you have more independence, and to realize that you can bike tour and race at the same time if you'd like to. I think all of it's just so much fun, and I just really encourage you, find what your sport is. It may not even be a bike, but whatever it is, find it, get outside the door, do it. It'll make your life better. Thanks again for listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast, and get out there and have some fun.
Coming up on Thursday's episode, we've got Jim Lemoncusa talking about skiing Mount Rainier. Until then, get out and have some fun.